Hey everybody, Dr. Paige Rawson here, and today we are continuing our conversation around ethics and the world religions. I am particularly excited about our guest today. Dr. Sarah Emanuel and I go back years, maybe like, what is it, like a decade now?
Almost a decade. Yeah, right?
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
So we did our doctoral work together at Drew University, and I was in Hebrew Bible and Dr. Emanuel was in New Testament. It's pretty awesome, right? Today we're talking about Judaism with Dr. Emanuel, and what's really cool, I think, about you, right, is that you're a professor, a scholar, and also a practitioner of Judaism, but really, I mean, your scholarship is more in New Testament, right? So you kind of have this unconventional route, I think, into New Testament studies. And that's going to resonate with some of our students who, you know, a number of them are Christians, right? So really excited about the New Testament. And I am really excited to have you here. So I want you to have the opportunity to share a little bit about your journey today. First, let me ask you to just talk briefly about who you are and what you're doing in the world right now. What in the world are you doing? Welcome.
Okay. Yeah, so good to be here. So good to see you. This is so exciting. I'm Sarah. I just moved from the East Coast to Los Angeles, California. Huge move in COVID. I was teaching biblical studies at Colby College in Waterville, Maine. It's, you know, a very rural, small town, about 90 minutes from Portland, Maine. So really in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And I just moved from there to Venice Beach in Los Angeles County, where I'm teaching.
Which I love.
It's amazing. Love it. The beach is 2 blocks away. It's so nice. And I'm teaching New Testament at Loyola Marymount University. So, so I do work in both testaments, and you know, my job at Colby was very much in both Hebrew Bible and New Testament, but the job here at LMU is more specifically in New Testament, and my focus scholarly wise is New Testament. So what am I doing in the world? I'm planting roots as much as I can in LA. I'm surfing as much as I can, learning how to surf, learning to play the cello, trying to pick up hobbies in COVID, and finding my way on this new campus, teaching New Testament studies to a beautifully diverse set of students, much more diverse than Colby was. In terms
of Wingate, really. I mean,
yeah, so it's really diverse in terms of socioeconomic status. Even, you know, we've got a lot of students not from the LA area, a good amount of international students, and very racially and even to an extent theologically diverse campus. LMU is a Catholic school, but unlike some religiously affiliated universities, you do not need to sign a statement of faith to be part of the LMU community. So you do not need to have any sort of convictions related to anything religious, whether on the faculty side or the student side. So it's a really diverse place. And as you said, I'm a Jewish New Testament scholar. So
hybrid.
Hybrid. My Jewishness kind of, like Sarah Silverman says it well, it just kind of like oozes out of my pores. I'm much less of a spiritual Jew, and very much just like I grew up in this culture, in this ethnic world, and it's just who I am, and shapes so much about how I see the world, how I see the New Testament, how I live and breathe on a day-to-day basis.
Right, and Jesus was a Palestinian Jew.
Yes, that's right, Palestinian Jew.
Look at there. Good. Well, let's talk a little bit. I mean, that's good. Now that you've sort of set us up, right? That's a great segue. Your Jewishness kind of oozes out of your being, right? To use this phrase from Sarah Silverman. So what we're wanting to do with these videos, right, is we're offering students an opportunity to get a more personal, a more intimate look at the world religions. Right, so we're thinking about, and you mentioned this, right? We're thinking about culture, we're thinking about relationships, we're thinking about experiences, practices, morals, right? About your community. So could you share then some of your story with us, right? Some of some of what it means for you to be Jewish, right? I mean, you can talk through your life, right? I mean, obviously through Judaism into New Testament studies, very interesting, right? But also, so not just your journey, but also your Jewishness, right? What does it mean to you in a personal sense? You could also speak maybe to what it means to be Jewish. And I know this becomes difficult, but what would you say it means to be Jewish also in a global sense? I know I've given you kind of 3 different questions there, but
Yeah, yeah. So I was born into a Jewish family. My father was raised Jewish, was raised very much as a practicing Jew, very, very much as a practicing Jew. My mother is from the north area of Italy, from a city called Trieste, which interestingly enough is known for its Jewish I don't know what, not even population, because a lot of people, you know, died in the Holocaust, but it had a Jewish population. You know, there was a transit camp there in World War II. So what's interesting is, even though my mother is from a city in Italy that was known for its, you know, Jewishness in some way, my mother was not born Jewish. She converted to Judaism when she met my father. And it was very much not a spiritual, personal, longing kind of conversion. She did it because it meant something to my father. And they decided together that they were going to raise their children Jewish. And for some reason,
which kind of speaks to that cultural piece, right? So thinking of it beyond, right, what we typically think about religion, and the students are learning about this, right? We typically think that religion is a personal sort of decision, right? A devotional decision, but what you're saying actually supports this idea that religion is more of a cultural thing.
Yes, yes. And, you know, this is a really complicated thing what I'm about to say, especially in the time that we're in. But Jewishness brings into it a complication of converting into an ethnic group. You know, when you convert into Judaism, it's not there. So here's the major difference between Judaism and the other Abrahamic traditions, being Christianity and Islam.
Right.
There is no creed in Judaism. So when you ask that larger question, what does it mean to be Jewish globally? It is such a complicated and difficult question to answer, because there is no creed. There's no profession of faith. And so the conversion process is, you know, yeah, you're entering a Jewish theological conversation, sure, but you are converting into a people. You are joining a peoplehood. You are taking on a culture and a heritage. And that was important to my parents, for them to both be part of that peoplehood for their kids.
Right.
I do know that my mother does miss some of her spiritual upbringing. I think she misses some of the songs and some of the foods, just that kind of community. But I wasn't raised with that. I was raised very much in a Jewish world. So there are different sects of Judaism today. The primary ones that I think a lot of people hear about are Orthodox, conservatism, and Reform. There is a fourth that's gaining traction in the US, which is the Reconstructionist movement, which stems out of the conservative movement, but is very politically progressive. So I was raised in the Reform movement, which, you know, out of the 3, probably in practice feels the most similar to entering a Christian church, just because there's more English than you would hear at an Orthodox, conservative, or Reconstructionist service. There's a hybrid of Hebrew and English, and there's more songs in English in the Reform community. So for that reason, it might feel a little bit more like church, because you hear in the US, because you hear English. Yeah, but really, I mean, you know, I was raised going to services every Friday night. That's a Reform thing to do. Rather than Saturday morning, you go to Shabbat services on Friday. and you call it a temple in Reform services rather than a synagogue, but for all intents and purposes, you go to the synagogue.
Right.
We do that every Friday. Grew up going to Hebrew school every week for, ages 3 through 9 once a week, and then 9 through 13 twice a week to prepare.
Wow. So this was an integral part of who you were. I mean, that was your community.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And I didn't even realize it. It was just so normal. And I'm from Las Vegas. So Las Vegas is akin to what I'm experiencing at LMU. It is so insanely beautifully diverse. It is, and it's not gentrified in the, we could say like New York City is so diverse, but Las Vegas, you will have, so like I went to public school and you are just surrounded by, the neighborhood that is put into this public school, all sorts of different types of beings, racially, spiritually, culturally, ethnically, and monetarily. Like you're just in the mix of so many different types of people that I didn't realize that Jewishness was even like, everyone was just doing something, It wasn't until I went to the East Coast in a very white Christian world, especially focusing on New Testament as an academic study, that I was like, whoa, holy shit, I'm really Jewish, like I was raised really Jewish, like.
So you became aware, sensitized of your difference, of this particular difference. Yes. I want to ask you, if you don't mind, I don't in any way want to cut you off, but I do want you to speak a little bit just for a moment to then, what was it that was drawing you into New Testament studies? And I think our students might be interested in this, right? So you grow up Jewish, very Jewish, if I may, right? Yeah. And then you decide, you know what, I think I'm going to go into New Testament studies. What was happening there for you?
So let me add just real quick that my very Jewishness was not centered around faith.
Okay, so important to know.
Even though I went to services every Friday, I mean, up through I was 18, I was going to services with my parents every Friday.
Yes.
And, I was very much a part of the Jewish community. Like everyone, my name growing up was Sarah Lieberman. Like everyone knew the Liebermans. Like, because we were just there.
We're that family. Yeah.
We were that family.
Well, I grew up in church and I know those families. Yeah. You were that family.
Yeah. We're that family. And then my parents had my sister 9 years after me. So like, we were just there for so long, even after I went to college, my sister was being bat mitzvahed. So like everyone knows the Liebermans. But it was really like, I rarely, I don't know if I ever heard the word heaven spoken in synagogue, conceptions of an afterlife, or even conceptions of a God. Like I did not grow up with some sort of relationship with the divine realm. It was very much focused on community, doing things, reference, like you don't even realize that they're your reference, honestly, until you get thrown into another world and you're like, wow, this was different. I was raised with a different culture than, a lot of people, which is interesting because like I knew it in Vegas that there were so many different kinds of cultures, but when I was immersed in a really centered white Christian world, that's when it really came to mind that globally speaking, Jewishness is kind of different. So back to your question of, how as this cultural ethnic Jew did I get into New Testament? That actually goes, it's one of my earliest memories is an interest in Jesus.
Really? In Jesus specifically?
And Jesus specifically. Wow. Yeah. So I must be like 3 or 4 years old. I'm being babysat by a family friend and it's Christmas time. So it's the tree and there's like the nativity set underneath the tree.
Of course.
It looked to me to be, I thought they were toys, like little figurines to play with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I was playing with these little figurines and I saw this baby that looked to me to be in a basket. So I got really excited because I was already, this primed Jew. And I just sort of like screamed to the babysitter, like, look, it's baby Moses. Like, look how exciting this is.
Oh my gosh, of course you did. Which then is interesting too, when you think about Yeshua, when you think about like the roots, right, the Savior, Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah. So I,
Okay. Huh.
in my memory, you know, of being a 3 or 4-year-old, we got into like an argument. I'm told later by this babysitter that, you know, she thought it was like the most adorable thing that she ever heard. But in my mind, like I thought we were like full blown getting into an argument
because she was correcting you.
Yeah. She was like, no, Sarah, this is Jesus. And I was like, no. Like I know, I go to Hebrew school. I know what I'm talking about. Like, this is Moses. There's a baby in a basket. This is
what
Moses.
a really miraculous moment, like that, the juxtaposition, right? And really the resonances between these two stories, right?
Yes. So that was like, I just kind of tell myself, I've been curious in this guy ever since, you know, and I grew up like going to church services with friends because I was so interested.
But never wanting yourself to convert.
No.
Right? I mean, that was not a thing. It was really just this almost, I don't want to say an adoration. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a fascination, respect of what.
Yeah. And like always thinking, you know, what is, like, there's a Jewish piece here. Like, what, this guy, and you know, you're raised thinking like this guy was Jewish, but then what, you know, like what happened? You know, this guy, you know, his name is Josh.
Because what really happened, Josh, that's right. But like, what really happened was much later, right? He wasn't even privy to this thing that happened much later on. Right.
Exactly. So so I was always just sort of
posthumously was when all the rest of this stuff developed.
Yes, absolutely.
Very cool.
And you know, like, I would go to, you know, like Bible studies and church services and sacrament meetings, and you know, I never felt this pull to convert, but what I will say is I felt a pull to want to have a pull, which was because I was never, because I didn't have this spiritual connection with the divine realm or even a concept of an afterlife. I was envious of those who did because I was really afraid of dying, and really afraid my brain, you know, just didn't go to a place of an afterlife, which is so interesting because like all of these contemporary Christian notions of there being some sort of age after this, I mean, it stems from early Jewish theology, but later Judaism didn't maintain that. They sort of said, okay, Christianity, you can have it, and we're just going to focus on the here and now, and it's fascinating.
But even, I mean, and let me interject briefly. I mean, I even talk to my students about what we see in the Hebrew Bible, which is not a notion in the Hebrew Bible of a heaven and a hell, right? Everybody goes to the same place, right? So that and we even look at what happens in the New Testament, which is influence from, and I don't want to get too far off track because I'm cognizant of time, but which is an influence from pagan mythologies, right? I mean, Tartarus, for instance, right? These ideas of and the Elysian fields, right? These ideas of a heaven and a hell, right, are later developments that, to me, I wouldn't say they don't find their roots in the Hebrew Bible, right? They're
but so they're connected to, yes, you know, Greco-Roman mythology, but also and pagan mythology, but also Jewish literature's influenced by Greco-Romanness.
Absolutely.
That did not get canonized. You know,
right.
And so
absolutely.
Judaism today doesn't like lean on those theologies in the same way, but Christianity sort of grew out of that pagan Jewish theology, non-canonized texts, you know, that contemporary Judaism doesn't hold on to. And I was jealous because it sounded nice. You know, it sounded really nice.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's beautiful.
And to think that there might be something after this and something good after this, whatever good, you know, is to
Wow.
And so, it just sounds, I mean, it's a brilliant survival tactic.
I'm gonna, oh my gosh, right. So I want to kind of move us into this statement that you made, right? You said there's no creed, right? When I asked you if you could explain to me sort of universally or globally, what does it mean to be Jewish? You said, you know, it's really difficult, and you're talking a bit to the ethnic piece, the cultural piece. So could you say then, right, what is it then that makes one Jewish, right? I mean, are there norms, guidelines? I mean, aside from more broadly thinking ethnically and culturally, right?
Yeah.
What about norms, guidelines, commands, principles? Is there a worldview, right? I mean, is there anything that we could kind of hold on to and say, these are tenets of Judaism, you know, that are central to this religion, this faith tradition?
Yes. So keep in mind that I was raised Reform, and through grad school, I worked at a Reconstructionist synagogue, which is, you know, very, very politically progressive. And, you know, I'm not speaking from an experience or life related to Orthodoxy. So I believe an Orthodox Jew would likely answer this question very differently. But speaking more globally, which includes Orthodox persons, you know, all the way to some sort of, you know, new age Jewish community.
A more mystical kind of, good.
So speaking in all of that, I would say the spectrum, yes, I would say two come to mind. And so one is B'Tselem Elohim, that we are created in God's image, which I do think you can be atheist and Jewish at the same time, because there's no creed. So when I say created in God's image, that doesn't mean that every Jew is going to have the same understanding of God. You know, God could be this actual deity out there, or it could just be representative of humanity, or some sense of goodness or something, you know.
Can I push pause for 1 second?
Yeah.
Because this, I think, is really important for our students to hear, right? What you just said, in some ways, might for them be antithetical to what they think Judaism is. Right. Because what you just said is that one could be atheist and Jewish because the idea of God is so broad and so open, so expansive, that it isn't necessarily theistic, which I think is like, right? So to be created in God's image then doesn't necessarily mean that God has to be that traditional concept that we often understand the deity God to be.
And so I think, you know, some on the more atheist side would take that as, you know, and so like when I worked at the Reconstructionist temple, like half of my students, I taught Hebrew school, did not believe in God or a God, and that was no problem. Like,
but we're still very much Jewish, and we're still they were in Hebrew school.
They were, and these students were so invested. You know, they were in the youth groups, and you know, tutoring, and so no issue at all. And the rabbis were aware, no problem. But so I think you can take B'Tselem Elohim as, you know, care for each other, you know, like we're all equal in some way. We're all human. We all have some sort of, people would say, like this spark of the divine, but of course divine could be thought of, you know, as earth, as matter, but matter in, you know, matter as in the science way, but as we matter as humans, you know, something. So care for each other, you know, we're all, you know, B'Tselem Elohim.
So then to be created in God's image then necessarily entails the way that you treat other human beings.
Yes.
So you said there were two sort of central tenets.
So that would be one,
But in that one though is also, which I'm gonna just, right, I mean, having been raised Christian myself, right, I'm also thinking of
it's a very Jesus thing to say.
The greatest commandment, right? Yeah. That you love God and then you love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? That all these things are contingent, right? That they are all dependent on one another, that they're all intertwined. Really.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So,
and in Jesus's theology, you know, he's getting it from Jewishness. You know, granted, his Jewishness is different from today's Jewishness, but you know, he's still relying on a Jewish way of being.
Very Jewish. Not Jesus.
That was there already. So
good. Okay, so
second tenet, tikkun olam. repair the world. So it's a very, we are here and now. Let's, what does it mean to you to repair the world? And so, of course, goodness, who's to say what constitutes good? Who's to say what constitutes bad? But, however you understand B'Tselem Elohim and however you understand Tikkun Olam, those I'd say become very much part of how one relates to Jewishness. And then, the foods and the terminology and the oozing and the pores is.
No, but this is great because that's actually what I was going to ask you is then out of these two notions, out of these two tenets, right? What then are the traditions and the practices that would stem out of this? I mean, you're saying the food and that, I mean, right? Are there traditions, practices, holy days, right? I mean, what comes from these two? Could you say that sort of?
Yeah, it's such a hard question because in some ways I don't see those two primary tenets as easily translating onto the whole. I would say, okay, so those are sort of two.
Or even entailed, right? I don't mean that they necessarily have to stem out of.
Yes. There's also tradition. So let's add tradition.
Just, okay, good.
So not every Jew will follow these traditions, right? Like not every Jew thinks that they even bleed Jewishness and care about each other in the world is going to practice these traditions. But generally speaking, if you are affiliated with a synagogue at any level, at any spectrum, that synagogue will partake in these traditions.
Okay, good. Okay. So your community center is going to participate in these particular.
And you are invited alongside your community if you wish to partake in these traditions.
Good.
So every week is a holiday, Shabbat.
All right.
Not a holiday every week. And the way that the Jewish.
I love that perspective.
Yeah, you gotta.
I live like that. Every week's a holiday.
Every week's a holiday, and in the ways that the way that the Jewish days work is it's sunset to sunset. So Friday evening when the sun sets starts Shabbat, and then when the sun sets on Saturday, that's called Havdalah. That's also a holiday, and that's the ushering out of Shabbat into the work week. And depending on how you relate to Judaism and what community you're a part of, you'll celebrate Shabbat differently. Some people will abstain from, work week duties altogether and just focus solely on their relationship with their understanding of their God, to the point of not even wanting to, turn on and off the lights. That's considered work. But others, will, if you are celebrating the tradition of Shabbat, others will say, look, Shabbat is just a time, even for an hour, to disengage from social media or to recenter or, go for a hike. So you can really make sense of Shabbat if you are going to interact with Shabbat in a variety of ways. Then there are, holidays throughout the year. The one that many people know is Hanukkah. Hanukkah is not a big deal in Judaism, but in response to Christmas,
absolutely,
it gets some. We need some presents too. So got Hanukkah. That's just commemorating a war that was won by Jews in antiquity, which is when you look at the history, that's like a really whoa, we won something, wow, look at that. But then Passover, talking about Moses, that commemorates the story of Exodus.
Absolutely.
And just with it, the story of continual enslavement of Jews in all sorts of ways and survival of it. And then we just finished the High Holy Days, which is the Jewish New Year. The Jewish New Year comes in the fall and is followed by a holiday called Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Repentance. So there's a day dedicated to, thinking about your year and really just sort of trying to, it's like a bigger Shabbat, take a break, think about your year rather than think about the week, think about your year. And,
time for reflection.
Teshuvah is a primary tenet, which just means to return. So try to center yourself, forgive yourself.
Yes.
And sort of get ready for that new year. So Those are some major traditions. Also, keeping kosher comes up a lot. Kosher just means, abiding by certain dietary practices. But again, that could be understood in such a wide variety of ways. It could be, reading the laws in Judaism, both within the Hebrew Bible and the ways in which rabbis later on have interpreted those laws, very strictly. For example, don't mix meat and dairy. Or for others who keep their understanding of kosher, it could mean, their own version of an ethical way of living. So some people might think, kosher for me is having a vegan diet.
Vegan, that's it, yeah, right.
Yes,
right.
Or kosher for me is, I will eat meat and I will even eat meat and dairy together, but I'm going to be cognizant of where I am purchasing.
Okay.
And then some Jews, don't think of kosher as being necessary anymore, that they understand that was something that was important in antiquity, but perhaps not for them today. So many Jews do not keep kosher. I was not raised in a kosher home, even though I was raised very Jewish, celebrating Shabbat every week, but I was not raised to keep kosher at all.
Okay. One of the things I'm thinking too is, as you're speaking about kosher, right, is also the way in which ethics comes into play, right? And that's, this course, right, is a course on world religions and ethics, right? And so I'm thinking about how people are conscious of the way that they eat, right, in relation to their identity, right, culturally. I want to turn a corner here a little bit, because one of the things that we're doing with these videos is presenting kind of an ethical dilemma to the scholars and practitioners that we're talking to. And, such a strange time that we're living in right now, right? And when has it not been a strange time, but particularly now, I think also in light of what's happening with the pandemic. But what I want to ask you is it possible to offer sort of a concrete response to a moral or ethical dilemma that we're facing right now? One of the things that I'm thinking about is, specifically what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm also thinking about what's happened with the Me Too movement. I'm thinking about also specifically what's happening in Israel-Palestine right now, right? And so I'm curious, because we've talked about traditions, right? We've talked about, and I'm thinking especially, right, as we've thought about being created in God's image, right? How do we treat other people, right? Tikkun Olam, like how are we repairing the world, right? How would you respond to an ethical dilemma that does or does not immediately involve the Jewish community? And I'm not going to even give you an ethical dilemma that you have to necessarily speak to, right? But as I'm talking, right, is there anything that sort of comes up in terms of your own response, or the response of your community?
Yes, great question. And the answer is yes, things do come up, multiple things come up. So I'm going to backtrack and build up to answer this question. Because,
okay, great.
When thinking about ethics within the Jewish community, something totally different sort of comes up in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is circumcision.
Okay.
So I'm going
do it. Go all the way in.
So a lot of, traditionally speaking,
yes,
Jewish infants are circumcised on the 8th day as a marker of their a literal marker of their marking of their initiation into the Jewish people.
Right.
And some folks today question if that is ethical, if that's appropriate, if it is the choice of anyone outside of the body, outside
consent.
of the
It's
body.
An issue of consent.
Yeah. But then of course it goes in, is it, so many things that we're doing with our infants, they can't give consent.
Anyway,
the
exactly.
food that we're giving them, there's so many things that are happening.
Yes.
So some folks will be like, look, this is not my battle. But there are some Jews who are like, look, this really matters to me ethically. And there's even a community or a frame of mind called, I forget what it is, like the community of Shalom or something like that, where they say, like the best way to be Jewish is like to not circumcise your son and to instead do the same thing that is done for girls, and I'm using these binaries.
I know.
There's all sorts of in-betweens, but to do what would be done for those without a penis, and being initiated into Judaism, which is a baby naming, right? You're also given, that's also part of the ethnicity. Like I have a Jewish name in addition to my English name.
Which I have to say, honestly, though, if you're thinking about trying to disrupt gender binaries, I mean, that is a way to go about it, because you're considering this aspect of consent, that this human being does not have an opportunity to choose for themselves at this point. And also it does this thing of calling into question, why must little boys do this and not little girls? So then it just sort of like destabilizes this notion anyway of either or.
Yes. And like this idea, that, like centering on the penis is what brings one into the peoplehood. And then you like go downstairs, eat bagels, and then, like cut off the foreskin of this eight-day-old, so like there's a lot of things happening here.
Well, and also, do we continue to, one of the things I talk to my students about too, and a question that we ask, right, is the debate around the 10 Commandments, right? It's like the fact that people would want to display the 10 Commandments in a city hall, for instance, right? Should we be utilizing laws from thousands of years ago, right? Is that really something that we need to be doing in a context so vastly different from the one in which these were written? But anyway.
So that leads me to answer your question about, say for instance, Black Lives Matter in ethics and things like that. So the reason that I'm thinking about circumcision is, I guess I was thinking about traditions, and then, there's no creed, and Jewishness is just very much marked by difference in debate and conversation. It would be really odd to enter a Torah study or a Bible study and not have a million different questions and thoughts and differences come up, right? And I think that that's beautiful. And so much of being Jewish is related to its struggle, right? Israel, the term itself is to struggle with God.
That's right.
Understand God.
Yes.
So I would think there's an ethical, and Jews have struggled in all sorts of ways.
Historically, absolutely.
Historically, with those who aren't Jewish, but also internally. Like, what does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to say that there's a God? What does it mean to circumcise or not circumcise? So I would say my ethical Jewish way of answering, how do you enter what's going on in the world, is to be open to the struggle, to enter those conversations, to ask questions, to think about, what would it mean to repair the world in this way? Should you have a voice right now? Should you listen right now? Just what is the struggle, and not be afraid of the struggle? That sort of be my answer, my Jewish answer.
Wow. I think that's a great note to end on. Like, I don't even think there's anything else I could say, because that's it, right? I mean, what is it to try to be an ethical human being other than to really grapple with this difficult, wonderful, magical, scary, exciting thing that is being human, and how we're constantly confronted with these questions, right? I mean, life is just just a series of inquiries, right? That we, wow. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, whoa, that was fun.
That was good. Good stuff.
Yeah, really cool. Really cool. As my folks used to say, we're having church in here.
Yes, I feel it. I feel it. We're having, yes.
My community. Anyway, Dr. Sarah Emanuel, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're doing great work. Yeah, so guess we'll see you next time.
Okay.
All right, you guys. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you around.